the ice has broken, Trump has turned against Putin. Even more weapons for Ukraine. Crucial decisions have already been made. This will change the course of the war. The bloody dictator is raging. Trump is preparing a powerful surprise for Vladimir Vladimirovich. The US is putting the squeeze on Russia. The shockwave will hit all fans of Russian oil and more. The Russian economy is on the brink. American missiles aimed at Moscow and Beijing. Shocking details of a secret conversation. The ball is in the US's court. Who will win this geopolitical match? Stay tuned.
Putin is constantly throwing all sorts of nonsense at us. If you want the truth, he was always very polite. But as it turns out, that means nothing.
It seems the ice has started to break. For the first time since returning to the White House, Donald Trump has begun taking steps that could truly change the course of the war in Ukraine. These steps are in Kyiv's favor.
We are not happy with Putin. I am not happy with Putin. I can tell you this quite frankly right now, because he's killing a lot of people and many of them are his own soldiers, mostly his soldiers and their soldiers. Right now, the death toll is already up to 7,000 a week. I am not happy with Putin. Are there any other questions?
Yes, sir. You just said that you are not happy with Vladimir Putin. Do you plan to take any action?
Don't we really want to arrange a little surprise for them?
At the same time, the White House is considering options for aid to Ukraine. The top priority is protecting Ukrainian airspace. Among other things, according to the Wall Street Journal, Trump is considering providing Ukraine with an additional Patriot air defense system. This could become the first major arms delivery not tied to a decision by the Biden administration, and at the same time, a signal that the US is coming back.
We are going to send more weapons. They must be able to defend themselves. Right now, they are under very serious attacks, so we will have to send more weapons. Yes, mostly of a defensive nature.
We have found ourselves in a certain spiral, and it is very important that it works for us, not against us. And in the situation where Ukraine is now working diplomatically with the United States, it is very difficult to determine whether this is in some sense a plus, in what sense it is a neutral pace, or in what sense it might even be harmful.
As we remember, Ukraine received a blow to the gut from the US in the first days of July. Across the ocean, they partially suspended the supply of weapons to Kyiv, from Patriot interceptor missiles to ammunition for F-16s. At that time, Trump claimed that Biden had supposedly depleted the country. It later turned out that the decision to freeze supplies was a surprise even to his own circle. According to CNN, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth did not inform either Trump himself or his advisors about this. Special Representative for Ukraine Kellogg, Secretary of State, and National Security Advisor Marco Rubio learned about the suspension of supplies from the news. The 47th president himself publicly stated that he is not responsible for this decision. But that's not all. The aggressor country may be facing a devastating blow. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham has initiated a new package of sanctions against Russia. Specifically, the document provides for a 500% tariff on imports from countries that continue to purchase Russian oil and raw materials.
I'm considering it. Yes, I'm considering it. The Senate has adopted and continues to adopt very tough sanctions. But yes, I'm considering it.
If we simply forecast the situation and Graham's bill is passed, what will that mean? Where will Russia get its money? What will be cut back? I would predict that first and foremost, any expenses not related to the country's military-industrial complex will continue to be slashed. Again, things like healthcare, education, and pension spending. At the same time, they will try to maintain spending on the military-industrial complex. Their cuts will have to be made as well, perhaps not as significantly as one might wish, but cuts will be necessary. The only thing I would suggest is that, for example, instead of the current $150 billion, if, say, this revenue drops by at least a quarter, it means that they will try to make up 2/3 of it at the expense of the social sector. There will be a massive global decline there, but 1/3 will still have to be shifted to the sector related to the military-industrial complex. And that is at least a loss of about 15% out of those $150 billion.
At the same time, a scandalous audio recording from 2024 surfaced, published by CNN. In it, Trump tells donors how he threatened Putin and Xi Jinping with direct threats of bombings in the event of attacks on Ukraine and Taiwan.
I told Putin, if you go into Ukraine, I will bomb Moscow to hell. I'm telling you, I won't have a choice. And he was like, I don't believe you. Not a chance, he said. And I told him, oh, I will. He said again, I don't believe you. But the truth is, he did believe me. Well, about 10%. I told you he believed me about 10%. Then I met with Xi from China and told him the same thing. If you attack Taiwan, I will bomb Beijing to hell. He thought I was crazy. He asked, Beijing? I replied, I have no choice, I'll have to bomb you. We'll bomb Beijing. He didn't believe it either, but he still believed it about 10%. And 10% is still something. And 10% is all you need. Honestly, even 5% would be enough.
Is this just part of political maneuvering, or is it a serious turning point? For now, we can only hope that the US has truly come to its senses and is not going to back down in the fight for justice. But only time will reveal the real answer. Meanwhile, the fate of Ukraine and the security of the entire continent hang in the balance, where every next move by Washington carries enormous weight. A hellish fire show in Crimea, the Ukrainian partisans of ATESH have gone all in. The occupiers are in a panic. American super missiles are obliterating the Russians. HIMARS is causing a stir in the Kremlin. The Pentagon is secretly supplying weapons to Ukraine. We are for peace, the cynicism of the year from Peskov after a hellish night in Ukraine's capital. More about Russia's hell to flow.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Glory to Ukraine! The partisan movement ATESH continues to destroy Russian logistics in temporarily occupied Crimea. This time, a relay cabinet was destroyed on a crucial section of the railway passing over the Kerch Bridge. This stretch of track is strategic for the occupying forces, as equipment, fuel and personnel are regularly transported through it. The strike on this logistical lifeline delayed important deliveries of military cargo. And according to ATESH, there will be more and more such strikes. Meanwhile, the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, Oleksandr Syrsky, emphasized the restoration of positions and the holding of territories in the Kursk and Belgorod regions to tie down the enemy at the border with Ukraine.
The actions of Ukraine's defense forces in the Kursk and Belgorod regions are tying down the operational reserves of the occupying army, preventing the general staff of the occupiers' army from redeploying operational reserves directly to the territory of Sumy and accordingly Kyiv regions to expand their zone of presence and create the so-called buffer zone. And this has not only military but also accordingly political and informational consequences for the occupying country.
At the moment, the Russian army is unable to carry out the political decision of its military leadership, namely the creation of buffer zones in the territory of Sumy and Kharkiv regions.
And accordingly, the active nature of hostilities in the territory of Kursk and Belgorod regions makes it possible to divert a significant reserve of occupying troops from accomplishing this task.
Without having liberated their own territories, the occupiers are intruding into others. Mostly, though, it's just informational. They claim they've already captured everything and defeated everyone. For example, that's what they're doing now with the Dnipropetrovsk region.
There is no objective control data indicating any tactical successes by the occupiers in terms of capturing territories in the Dnipropetrovsk region. At the same time, the occupiers are trying to intensify pressure on the positions of Ukraine's defense forces in several directions at once, precisely with the aim of reaching the administrative borders of the Dnipropetrovsk region. First and foremost, this concerns the Novopolotsk and Pokrovsk directions.
Meanwhile, in Kyiv, the Security Service of Ukraine, SBU, detained Chinese spies who were gathering secret technologies for the production of Ukrainian missiles. A father and son, citizens of the People's Republic of China, tried to illegally export to China secret documentation on the Ukrainian missile system RK-360 megacoulombs Neptune, which sent the famous cruiser Moskva to the bottom. The detainees suspected of espionage face up to 15 years in prison with confiscation of property. The army of the aggressor state, Russia, is increasing the number of UAVs it uses during massive attacks on Ukraine. And among these drones, there are decoy imitators.
First and foremost, we're talking about German drones. Their main task is to drain the resources of Ukraine's air defense systems. For context, out of the 750 air ballistic munitions that were launched during the most massive recent attack on Kyiv, about 400 were German drones. In other words, this creates what is called a wave-like pattern of attack. This is the actual experience of the Ukrainian side, the so-called swarm attack.
The Ukrainian Air Force has already learned to effectively distinguish between real drones and deceptive decoys, relying on precise radar flight parameters as well as clear visual and acoustic characteristics.
A massive drone bombed Tatarstan. A terrifying drone crashed into a residential building. Shocking footage. Did Putin's new weapon self-destruct? Drone developers are in shock. What went wrong? Terrifying details of the drone crash in Russia coming up next.
The reason for the crash of the latest Russian drone, Altus, also known as Altair in Tatarstan, was electronic warfare. At least that's the version being put forward by the Ural Civil Aviation Plant, which is refining this unparalleled project. In the morning, Russians already on edge from Ukrainian drones began to notice a white plane flying overhead. Most likely, it was a Cessna aircraft conducting visual monitoring. A little later, the heavy drone itself took off. But almost immediately, it landed on a house in a garden cooperative.
Is very, very incredibly fast, that is for sure.
At this time around 5 in the morning, they say a white plane flew by. And after that, 2 more came, probably around 8:30. One of them ended up right here. All the parts, everything is labeled in Russian, but we can't say for sure if it's ours or not. People already came and tried to put out the fire themselves, with their own efforts. There was an old man living in this house, but he wasn't here that day. He was lucky.
And is it big?
Yes, there's a very significant and noticeable gap, about 5 meters, I truly think.
The Dubki Dacha cooperative, where the incident happened, is not just outside Kazan, but right on the glide path. This is the descent trajectory of an aircraft as it approaches the runway of the Kazan aviation plant, named after Gorbunov. It is here that the Tuesday 160 and Tuesday 22M are assembled and modernized. In addition, tests of the strike drone were conducted just a kilometer from the military airfield in Borisoglepsk, where the Russians relocated their strategic aviation after the web of attacks. In a comment to the Russian publication Business Online, the Ural Civil Aviation Plant, located in Yekaterinburg, and I remind you, involved in the Altus project, gave its own version of what happened.
Today, the Altus unmanned aerial vehicle created by the enterprise did indeed conduct a test flight, and the takeoff from the base airfield proceeded as normal. Later, during the flight, satellite navigation was disrupted by unidentified external electronic warfare means. The drone continued its flight using its inertial navigation system. For landing, it was necessary to send the aircraft for a second approach. The landing was carried out in inertial mode. An abnormal situation occurred.
The incident in Tatarstan showed that Russia has not abandoned its long-term project, the creation of a reconnaissance strike drone analogous to the Global Hawk. Moscow began the project for a heavy UAV with long endurance in 2011. At that time, the Sokol Design Bureau won a 1 billion ruble contract from the Ministry of Defense. 2 years later, the designers presented the first model of the drone, and another 2 years after that, in 2015, it briefly took off from the ground for the first time. The delivery of 2 systems was postponed to 2018, but this never happened. Instead, the general director of the Sokol Design Bureau, Alexander Gomzin, was sent to a pre-trial detention center. He was accused of fraud and misappropriation of budget funds. That same year, the Altair project was transferred to the Kazan branch of the Ural Civil Aviation Plant. How the UAV was finalized there is unknown. But a year later, the Ministry of Defense triumphantly reported a flight lasting 32 minutes at an altitude of up to 800 meters in fully automatic mode. And so, at the end of 2021, the agency announced the successful completion of the tests.
The extensive tests of the long-range unmanned aerial vehicle, the Altus-RU, have been successfully completed.
Moreover, propagandists rejoiced that this unparalleled development had received its own Russian engine to replace the German one, the supply of which had stopped due to sanctions. The Klimov Design Bureau developed its own VK 800-volt engine, which was suitable not only for the Altus, but also for an entire line of light Russian helicopters that suffered from the same problem as the drone. With the same takeoff power of 800 horsepower as the German engine, our design turned out to be dry, meaning it was simpler and more reliable in terms of oil lubrication. It also became even more technologically advanced thanks to the use of hot isostatic pressing. So the last weak point of our Altius was eliminated. At that time, the designers committed to delivering 18 Russified Altius drones to the Russian Ministry of Defense by the end of 2022. Later, they were expecting another 50 there, but so far, as it seems, only the residents of Tatarstan have seen them in action. By the way, according to journalists from the publication Business Online on the 30th of June, a court in Russia sentenced Alexander Gomzin, the creator of the first heavy drone model, to 8 years in a penal colony. However, due to the statute of limitations, he will not spend a single day behind bars. And there's another interesting fact in this story. The Simonov Design Bureau, which he headed and which was also declared bankrupt at the beginning of last month, will resume its operations.